This book was written 50 years ago. And it was presented before Congress in the House of Representatives on January the 10th, 1963. Now, for those of you that can remember back then, you'll remember what our nation was, what kind of mess we were in at that point. I want you to consider for a moment what you're about to see presented here before the House of Representatives. And the book was actually written by a former FBI agent. He worked with the FBI for 16 years, and then he went and became the chief of police in Salt Lake City. And it was during this time that he wrote his famous book called The Naked Communist. Now keep in mind, he worked for the FBI. This guy had inner knowledge of what was going on way back then about what communism was openly trying to get into the United States of America. Now, if you remember where we were at in that time frame, what was going on in the 60s, many of you remember the peace demonstrations, the war, all the riots and everything else. Lots and lots of things were going on. And a lot of things I'm going to share with you in this book literally took place in that little time frame. Matter of fact, he presents 45 goals for overthrowing the United States. Overthrowing it in the sense of making it become communist. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let us look at less than half of them. And I want you to observe these in the next few minutes, and you tell me, you be the judge, ladies and gentlemen, you tell me if this book that's 51 years old, written by a former FBI agent, if this book is not telling exactly the direction our country's going. Now, with this in mind, I want to give you just a few of them. Number 4, and as I said, we'll give you less than half of them, so just stick with me real quickly here. Number 4, permit free trade between all nations, regardless of communist affiliation, and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war. Of course, it was a short time after that that we started seeing things in our nation that was made, in effect, by communist nation. For example, I always thought it was kind of funny how American flags are made in China. And it's quite interesting when throughout the years they have interviewed and talked to people about their personal opinion of the products made in China and how that, it might be cheap, but it was talking about good value and all the other things. It's low on the quality level. Matter of fact, they just was recalling thousands of women kids started buying these flip-flops and started breaking out with these horrendous burns, some second and third degree burns on their feet. And of course, many of you remember a couple years ago when they had all these dogs that were dying because they had food that was being made there in China. Number 11, promote the UN as the only hope for mankind. If its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one world government with its own independent armed forces. Well, how many know since then that has literally taken place? Now the UN has its own army, and many of these stand on their own soil. Many of our American citizens are a part of this international army. Number 12, resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. I don't know how many of you saw it during the president's speech. There were a massive amount of pro-Obama, pro-communists that were standing right there in the United States Capitol, proudly waving their communist flags, a part of the United Communist Party of America. When would you have ever thought we'd got to that place? Number 15, capture one or both of the political parties in the U.S. Now keep in mind, this was written 51 years ago. Consider how radical that sounded, and consider today when you look at Newsweek just recently, the front page of the cover of Newsweek magazine openly says, we are all socialists now. Since the election, we're all socialists now. Does one of the political parties seem to be pushing socialist concepts, folks? I know it's kind of hard for us to believe this. That's why we need to pull our heads out of the sand. It is happening right before our very eyes. We are seeing we're losing an entire political party to this concept. Number 16, use technical decisions to the court of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. Who would have ever thought that you would get to the place in the United States of America that you could not say the Pledge of Allegiance because it said one nation under God? Who would have ever thought, folks, that a judge would keep kids from saying the Pledge of Allegiance, ban them from doing so? Number 17, talking about schools, listen to this. Get control. This is 51 years ago. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of the Teachers Association. Put the party line in textbooks. Well, every one of those things have been fulfilled to a T. Just last month, one of the National Education Association's top lawyer said openly in a speech, said that those who promote traditional values are a group of white-winged blank. Starts with a B. Now, these are the people that are teaching our children. And we'll talk more about the school thing in a minute. Number 21, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. I think that pretty much goes, undisputed. It seems today that CNN has turned into the communist news network. When you look at the junk that's on television today, and it's you believe it and you obey it because it's on TV. Number 22, continue discrediting American culture by degrading, now listen to this is pretty incredible, by degrading all forms of artistic expression. Now it's going to sound bizarre, but listen to what he says. An American communist cell was told to, quote, eliminate all good sculpture from parks and buildings, substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms. Now, why would an FBI agent uncover this from the communist attempt to take over when all of a sudden you start looking, and literally, as you look, it's almost as if art has become shapeless, meaningless forms. Matter of fact, this is the most acceptable form of art in our nation today. Number 23 has to do with this when it says control art critics and directors of art museums. Our plan is to promote, now listen to this, to promote ugliness, repulsive, meaningless art. And why? Now I want to think about this. Anybody that understands the power of the arts, and this is why we need to pray that God will raise up our children to be aggressive light and salt in the art industry. Because, folks, it's taken over by liberals, taken over by homosexuals, taken over by communist, socialistic minds. When you look at just some of the arts that are traveling the country, right now there's one that's crisscrossing the country for well over 2 years now, where you just get to look at people who died, and they didn't know who they were or whatever. They just took these people's bodies and used them as art displays. They cut their bodies in half so you can walk around and look at their insides of their bodies and everything else. There at the top there you see a guy reading the power of books, and it explodes. His brains are scattered across the wall. Here's a piece of art that hung in an art institute for a long time called Dyke. And then, of course, you see this little kid all makeuped out and all the rest. And then, of course, all the sadomasochism, the ugliness, the perversion, the filth, and it's all considered art.